My mother-in-law had no idea I was paying $12,000 a month for the very roof over her head. She had no idea the marble floor beneath her shoes, the crystal chandelier above her head, the Italian leather chairs around that dining table, and the 6,000 square foot Baldwin Hills mansion she loved bragging about were all mine. Not Devon's. Not Jamal's. Not hers. Mine. So when Loretta stood up at Sunday dinner, threw the serving dish of macaroni into the sink, and told me to pack my bag so her oldest son and his pregnant wife could take my master bedroom, she expected me to cry. She expected me to beg. She expected me to look across the table at my husband and plead for him to defend me. Instead, I placed my fork down, wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, and looked around that table like I was studying a system breach. My name is Zariah Washington. I am 32 years old, and I work as a senior cybersecurity architect. My entire career is built on finding hidden weaknesses before criminals exploit them. But for 3 years, the greatest weakness in my life was not hidden inside a server or a firewall. It was sitting at the head of my own dinner table, wearing a pressed shirt, sweating through his collar, and pretending he could not hear his mother humiliating his wife. That Sunday dinner had started with the usual fake family warmth. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey, candied yams, collard greens, and baked macaroni covered in golden cheese. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Silver forks tapped against expensive plates. To anyone outside, we would have looked like a successful family sharing a peaceful meal. But inside that room, peace was only decoration. Loretta never came to family dinners to love people. She came to rule them. She sat near the center of the table in her church dress, her pearls pressed against her neck, her eyes sharp with judgment. Jamal, Devon's older brother, leaned back like a king even though he had not kept a real job in years. Beside him, his wife Kesha kept one hand on her stomach, smiling like she had just handed the family a royal heir. 20 minutes earlier, she had announced that she was pregnant, and from that moment on, Loretta looked at her like she had been crowned queen of the family. "This baby changes everything," Loretta said, lifting her chin. "This family finally has a real future." The word real landed exactly where she wanted it to land. On me. Devon and I did not have children, and Loretta had turned that fact into her favorite weapon. She never said I was less of a woman directly, not at first. She just dropped little comments about legacy, motherhood, sacrifice, and women who knew their purpose. But that night, she was finished being subtle. She pushed her chair back slowly, picked up the heavy ceramic dish of macaroni and cheese, walked toward the kitchen, and suddenly hurled it into the stainless steel sink. The crash cut through the room like a gunshot. Cheese splattered across the marble counter. Kesha gasped, but I saw the excitement behind her hand. Jamal sat up straighter. Devon froze. Loretta turned around, wiped her hands on her apron, and locked her eyes on me. "Pack your bags, Zariah," she said. "You need to be out by the end of the month." For a few seconds, nobody moved. I looked at her carefully, waiting for the joke, the explanation, the slightest sign that she understood how insane she sounded. Nothing came. Her face was hard, proud, almost satisfied. "Excuse me?" I said quietly. "Are you telling me to leave my own home?" Loretta laughed, dry and cruel. "Your home? Please do not embarrass yourself, little girl. You are a guest here who has overstayed her welcome." I felt the air change around the table. Kesha lowered her eyes, pretending to be innocent. Jamal smiled like he had been waiting for this. Devon stared at his plate. Loretta stepped closer, her voice growing louder. "Jamal and Kesha are moving in. They need space. They need stability. They need the master bedroom for the baby. Kesha is carrying the first official grandchild of this family, and I will not have her cramped in some little apartment while you sit up here taking up a mansion you do not deserve." Kesha touched her stomach again and gave me a sweet little smile. "Come on, Zariah," she said softly. "You and Devon do not need all this space. Jamal needs a home office for his new business, and with the baby coming, it just makes sense. Besides, the living room set is perfect here. You probably would not have room for it wherever you move." My blood heated, but my face stayed calm. That was the moment I understood they had discussed this before dinner. This was not emotion. This was a plan. They had already decided who would sleep in my bedroom, who would sit on my sofa, who would inherit the life I had built with my own hands. Loretta pointed at me like she was issuing a church judgment. "Do not make this difficult. Devon has carried you long enough. He pays for this house. He provides this lifestyle. He works hard at that bank while you sit at a computer all day acting important. There it was, the lie Devon had fed them for years. In Loretta's world, Devon was the wealthy provider and I was the lucky wife living under his protection. In reality, Devon was a mid-level branch manager whose salary could not touch the cost of that house. He paid the cable bill and a television he bought on installments. Everything else was mine. The house was owned through Oasis Holdings LLC, my company. The $12,000 a month was not rent paid by Devon. It was my own money moving through my own corporate structure for legal and tax purposes. But Devon had let his mother believe he was the man behind it all because his ego needed applause more than his marriage needed truth. I turned to him slowly. "Devon," I said, my voice still calm. "Are you going to say something?" He looked up at me, and for 1 second I saw fear in his eyes. Not love. Not guilt. Fear. Loretta stared at him with warning in her face. Jamal lifted his eyebrows as if daring him to be honest. Kesha kept rubbing her stomach. Devon swallowed hard. "Zariah," he said, his voice weak. "Maybe Mom has a point." The words did not stab me. They emptied me. There is a kind of betrayal so complete that you do not scream because your body already understands the truth before your heart can catch up. "What did you just say?" I asked. Devon sat straighter, trying to sound like a man in control. "Jamal needs help right now. Kesha is pregnant. Family is supposed to support family. We do not need this much space. I looked online, and there are nice 2-bedroom apartments downtown. We can downsize for a while." Loretta clapped her hands once. "That is my son. That is the provider I raised." Jamal lifted his glass. "I knew you had my back, little brother." Kesha looked around the room again, already owning it in her mind. "So when can you be out?" she asked. "I would like to bring in cleaners before we move our things in." I stared at Devon. This man was willing to remove me from a house I owned so he could keep pretending to be rich. He was willing to watch his mother call me barren, useless, and undeserving just to protect a lie. And in that stillness, something inside me finally disconnected from him. In my work, when a system is infected, you do not negotiate with the virus. You isolate it. You cut off access. Then you wipe everything clean. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and stood. The chair scraped against the hardwood, sharp and clean. Everyone watched me, waiting for tears, rage, or begging. I gave them none of it. I pulled out my phone. "You want the house?" I asked Kesha. Her smile flickered. "We are taking the house," she said. I smiled back. "No, I am giving it to you." Loretta narrowed her eyes. "What game are you playing?" "No game," I said. "Devon said family makes sacrifices. He said Jamal needs this house. He said he will handle it. So who am I to stand in the way of such beautiful brotherly love?" Devon's face tightened because he knew me well enough to know I did not surrender easily. I turned to him. "Are you absolutely sure you want to transfer responsibility for this property to your brother and his wife? Are you sure you want to be responsible for what happens after I leave?" Devon glanced at his mother, then at Jamal. Pride rose in his face and killed whatever common sense he had left. "Yes," he said. "I am sure. I am the man of my household, and my word is final." That was the exact second my marriage ended. Not in court. Not with divorce papers. Right there, under my chandelier, at my table, inside my house, while my husband used the word final as if he controlled anything except his own destruction. "Perfect," I said. Then I dialed a number and put the call on speaker. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Elite Platinum Moving Services, this is Marcus. How can I help you?" I looked around the table as I spoke. "Hello, Marcus. This is Zariah, Washington. I need your premium emergency packing and moving service at my Baldwin Hills address exactly 48 hours from now. 6 o'clock in the morning. 10-man crew. 3 trucks minimum." Marcus answered immediately. "Of course, ma'am." "What are we moving?" I looked directly at Loretta. "Everything," I said. "Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every rug, every curtain, every plate, every spoon, every towel, every light fixture that belongs to me. If it is not part of the structure of the house, I want it packed, wrapped, loaded, and removed." The silence around the table turned heavy. Kesha's mouth opened. Jamal's smile disappeared. Loretta looked confused for the first time that night. Devon went pale. Marcus said, "Understood, ma'am. We will have the crew there Tuesday morning." Thank you, I said, and ended the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I will be out in 48 hours, I announced. Enjoy the house. Loretta shot to her feet. You cannot take the furniture. Devon bought that furniture. Devon bought those appliances. You are not stealing from my son. I walked slowly behind Devon's chair and placed one hand on his shoulder. He stiffened under my touch. Devon, I said softly, loud enough for everyone to hear, why do you not tell your mother whose name is on the receipts? His silence spread across the room like smoke. Loretta looked at him. Devon? He stared down at his plate. Mom, he whispered, just let her take the furniture. Kesha slammed her hand on the table. Let her take it? You promised us a furnished house. I leaned closer to Devon's ear. You heard her, sweetheart. You promised them. Then I straightened, looked at Kesha, and smiled. You might want to start shopping for air mattresses. Loretta's face twisted with rage. You bitter, hateful woman. No, I said quietly. I am a woman who finally understands the assignment. I turned toward the staircase. Every step felt like a chain breaking. Behind me, nobody spoke. They had demanded the house, and I had given it to them. But for the first time that evening, victory did not look good on their faces. It looked like fear. At the bottom of the staircase, I paused and glanced back. Oh, Devon, I said. He flinched. I will leave the television in the guest room. Since you still have 14 payments left on it, it is only fair you keep the one thing you actually bought. Then I walked upstairs, leaving them sitting beneath my chandelier, at my table, inside my house, choking on the first bitter taste of the truth. I did not go upstairs to cry. I did not lock myself in the bedroom and collapse onto the bed like the broken, abandoned wife everyone downstairs expected me to be. The moment I closed the master bedroom door behind me, I felt something entirely different. Relief. For years, I had been carrying a marriage that looked successful from the outside and felt exhausting from the inside. That dinner did not destroy my marriage. It exposed it. There is a difference. I stood in the center of the room and slowly looked around. The master suite was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glowing backyard. The pool lights reflected against the water like scattered diamonds. A custom fireplace stretched across one wall. The king-sized bed sat beneath artwork I had personally commissioned during a business trip to Chicago. Every piece in that room represented a milestone in my life. Not Devon's, mine. The funny thing about people who live off your success is that they eventually start believing they built it themselves. Devon's family had spent years enjoying the comfort my money created while convincing themselves they were somehow superior to me. I walked over to the large bay window and crossed my arms. Down below, I could still hear raised voices drifting up from the dining room. Loretta was demanding answers. Kesha was complaining about the furniture. Jamal was trying to sound confident. Devon was probably attempting to calm everyone down without admitting that his entire image was built on a lie. Good luck with that. I smiled slightly and opened the walk-in closet. The room was almost as large as some apartments. Designer dresses hung neatly organized by color. Business suits lined one side. Shoes occupied custom shelving from floor to ceiling. Everything was clean, organized, and earned. That word mattered to me. Earned. Nobody had handed me anything. I was raised by a single mother in a cramped apartment in Compton. We did not have luxury. We did not have generational wealth. We had overdue bills, secondhand furniture, and a constant awareness that one emergency could change everything. My mother worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. She cleaned offices during the day and worked security at night. I still remembered watching her come home exhausted, her feet swollen, forcing a smile because she refused to let me see how hard life really was. She taught me one lesson that stayed with me forever. Never build your future on somebody else's promises. Build it on your own foundation. That lesson was the reason I became obsessed with education. While other teenagers were chasing popularity, I was studying coding languages and network systems. While other people spent weekends partying, I spent mine building skills. By 24, I was already earning more money than anyone in my family had ever imagined. By 27, I had launched consulting projects for major corporations. By 29, I created Oasis Holdings LLC to manage my investments and real estate assets. And by 30, I purchased the Baldwin Hills property that Devon's family now believed belonged to them. The irony was almost funny. They saw a wealthy house and assumed a wealthy man must be responsible. The possibility that a black woman built it herself never even entered their minds. I pulled a suitcase down from the shelf and placed it on the floor. The sound echoed softly through the room. 48 hours. That was all I needed. 48 hours and the fantasy downstairs would begin collapsing. My phone buzzed. The screen displayed Devon's name. I stared at it for a moment before answering. What? I asked. There was silence on the other end. Then Devon sighed heavily. Can we talk? We already did. Zariah, please. About what? The part where your mother called me a guest in my own home? The part where your brother and sister-in-law stole my bedroom? Or the part where you agreed with them? Another silence. You know how my mother is. I laughed. A short, cold laugh. That excuse is getting old. I was trying to keep the peace. No, Devon. You were protecting a lie. His breathing became heavier. Look, things got emotional tonight. Nothing emotional happened. Your family showed me exactly who they are. You are overreacting. That sentence almost made me admire his confidence. Almost. I am overreacting? I repeated. Your mother tried to evict me. Your brother claimed my house. Your sister-in-law demanded my furniture. And you stood there agreeing with all of it. Nobody is taking your house. Really? I asked. Then why did you just volunteer my bedroom? He did not answer. That's what I thought. Zariah, let's just calm down. No, let's be honest. His voice hardened slightly. You always do this. Do what? Make everything about money. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Money? You know exactly what I mean. No, Devon. Explain it to me. You act like because you make more money than everyone else, you get to control everything. There it was. The truth, not my truth, his. The resentment he had been hiding for years. I sat down on the edge of the bed. You know what the difference is between us? I asked quietly. What? I never cared that I made more money. Silence. You did. He did not answer because he knew I was right. From the beginning, I had never hidden my success from him. I hid it from his family because he asked me to. He said his mother would not understand. He said Jamal would feel embarrassed. He said it would create tension, so I allowed him to play provider. I allowed him to take credit. I allowed his family to believe the mansion existed because of him. And now that lie had grown into a monster. Good night, Devon. Wait. What? You're really moving out? Yes. You're serious? Very. What happens after that? I looked around the room one last time. That's your problem now. Then I ended the call. The room became quiet again. For a long moment, I simply sat there. Not sad, not angry, just clear. Clarity is dangerous because once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that patience was strength, that understanding was love, that sacrifice would eventually be appreciated. But some people do not respect sacrifice. They consume it. Every time I paid a bill, covered an expense, rescued Devon from financial trouble, or tolerated another insult from Loretta, I thought I was protecting my marriage. In reality, I was financing my own disrespect. Downstairs, another argument erupted. I heard Loretta shouting. Then Kesha. Then Jamal. Then silence. They were already fighting over a house they did not own. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure Oasis Holdings portal. The familiar dashboard appeared on the screen. Property records, lease agreements, asset inventories, financial statements. Every legal document connected to the Baldwin Hills mansion sat right there in front of me. One click revealed the truth that could destroy every illusion in that family. Registered owner, Oasis Holdings LLC. Sole owner and managing executive, Zariah Washington. I looked at the screen and smiled. For years, Devon had been terrified that his mother would discover the truth. Soon, she would wish she never had. I opened the asset inventory and reviewed the list. Furniture, appliances, electronics, artwork, security systems, fixtures. Everything was documented. Everything was insured. Everything belonged to me. Downstairs, they were still celebrating their victory. They believed they had won a mansion. What they actually inherited was a trap. The most dangerous thing about entitled people is that they mistake kindness for weakness. Loretta thought she had pushed me out. Jamal thought he had secured a luxury lifestyle. Kesha thought she had manipulated her way into a dream home. Devon thought he could keep everyone happy without consequences. Every one of them was wrong. I closed the laptop and zipped the first suitcase shut. The sound felt final. 48 hours from now, the moving trucks would arrive. 48 hours from now, the mansion would look very different. And for the first time in years, I felt excited about the future, because the woman walking out of that house was not losing everything. She was finally taking everything back. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For years, mornings inside that house had followed the same pattern: coffee, emails, meetings, quiet preparation before the chaos of the day began. But this morning felt different. The house was still mine, yet somehow it already felt like a place I had outgrown. I stood in front of the bedroom window and watched the first streaks of sunlight spread across Baldwin Hills. Somewhere downstairs, I could hear movement. Doors opening, cabinets closing, voices. Apparently, nobody had slept very well. That was not surprising. Greed tends to keep people awake. I showered, dressed in a navy business suit, and walked downstairs as if nothing had happened. The moment I entered the kitchen, every conversation stopped. Loretta sat at the island with a cup of coffee. Jamal was scrolling through his phone. Kesha was eating fruit while dramatically holding her stomach. Devon stood near the sink looking exhausted. The atmosphere felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for an explosion. I simply poured myself coffee. "Good morning," I said. Nobody answered. Finally, Loretta cleared her throat. "I hope you spent last night thinking about your attitude." I almost laughed. "Actually, I slept great." Her eyes narrowed immediately. "You think this is funny?" "No," I replied calmly. "I think it is educational." Jamal rolled his eyes. "Here we go." I stirred my coffee slowly. "You know, I learned something useful yesterday." "And what was that?" Loretta asked. "That some people become very brave when they think somebody else is paying the bill." Jamal's expression hardened. "You always have something smart to say." "Occupational hazard." Kesha sighed dramatically. "Can we please not fight? Stress isn't good for the baby." I noticed Devon glance toward her stomach. For a brief second, something strange crossed his face. Doubt. It disappeared almost immediately, but I caught it. "Interesting. Very interesting." Loretta changed the subject. "Jamal and Kesha will begin moving some of their things in this weekend." "That's fast," I said. "The baby is coming," she snapped. "Preparation matters." "Of course." Jamal leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, it works out better for everybody. Once we're settled in, this place will finally feel like a real family home." I looked around the kitchen. "A real family home." "Exactly." I nodded slowly. "Funny. Because nobody seemed interested in family when I was paying for Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas gifts, vacations, or emergency expenses." Silence. Jamal immediately looked away. That reaction told me everything. Over the years, I had quietly solved more problems for that family than they would ever admit. When Jamal fell behind on rent 2 years earlier, the money had mysteriously appeared. When Loretta needed dental surgery, the bill somehow vanished. When Kesha's car was repossessed, a solution arrived before she lost transportation. None of them knew where the money came from. Devon always accepted the credit, and I always stayed quiet. Looking back, that silence might have been my biggest mistake. People rarely appreciate sacrifices they never witness. They simply start expecting them. "You know what your problem is?" Loretta suddenly asked. "No. Tell me." "You keep score." I smiled. "Actually, I keep records." Devon nearly choked on his coffee. He understood the difference. Records were dangerous. Records were facts. Records were things that could be proven. Loretta dismissed the comment with a wave of her hand. "Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. The decision has been made." "You're right," I said. "It has." She mistook my agreement for surrender. That was becoming a pattern. Around 9 o'clock, I left for work. The headquarters of my company occupied the top 2 floors of a modern glass building in downtown Los Angeles. The moment I stepped into the executive elevator, my mood improved. Unlike my home life, business followed rules. Numbers mattered. Contracts mattered. Evidence mattered. Reality mattered. My executive assistant, Vanessa, met me outside my office. "Good morning, Zariah." "Morning." She studied my face carefully. "You look dangerous today." I laughed. "Do I?" "Absolutely." Vanessa handed me a folder. "Should I be worried about somebody?" "Not worried," I said. "Just prepared." We stepped into my office. Floor to ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. My desk sat near the center of the room. Awards lined one wall, framed certifications covered another. Everything in that office represented years of discipline. Nobody had handed it to me. Nobody had gifted it to me. Nobody had married me into it. I built it. Vanessa sat across from me. So what's going on? She asked. I considered my answer carefully. Vanessa had worked beside me for 4 years. She knew more about my life than almost anyone. Let's just say my husband made a very expensive mistake. Her eyebrows rose immediately. How expensive? Potentially life-changing. For him or for you? Definitely for him. She smiled. Now I'm interested. I opened my laptop and pulled up several property documents. I need a complete inventory review on the Baldwin Hills property. Vanessa's expression shifted into professional mode instantly. Everything. Everything. Furniture? Yes. Artwork? Yes. Appliances? Yes. Electronics? Everything. She stared at me. Okay. That's not normal. Neither is what happened yesterday. For the next hour, we reviewed asset records. Every item had documentation. Purchase receipts, insurance records, serial numbers, ownership verification. Years ago, my legal team convinced me to maintain detailed records on every significant asset. At the time, it felt excessive. Now it felt brilliant. Wow, Vanessa said while scrolling through the inventory. This house is basically a luxury showroom. Pretty much. Who exactly are we preparing for? I smiled. A family lesson. Around noon, my phone rang again. Devon. I let it ring twice before answering. What? Can we have lunch? He asked. Why? Because we're married. For now. Silence. Zariah. What do you want? I think things got out of control. Interesting observation. Can we please talk face to face? I leaned back in my chair. Fine. 1 hour. One lunch. That's all. We agreed to meet at a restaurant halfway between his office and mine. As soon as the call ended, Vanessa looked at me knowingly. Damage control? Panic control. Do you think he's finally figuring it out? I glanced toward the city skyline outside my window. No. Then what? I think he's realizing that for the first time in our marriage, I'm not protecting him from consequences. Vanessa nodded slowly. That should be fun to watch. I smiled. I think so too. What Devon did not understand yet was that the dinner had only been the beginning. He still believed this situation was an argument, a misunderstanding, a temporary crisis that could be smoothed over with excuses and apologies. But this was no longer a marital disagreement. This was an audit. And audits have a way of uncovering things people desperately want hidden. By the time the truth finally surfaced, Loretta, Jamal, Kesha, and Devon would all discover the same painful lesson. They had spent years building their confidence on a foundation of lies. And foundations built on lies always collapse eventually. When I arrived at the restaurant, Devon was already waiting. That alone told me how nervous he was. Normally, Devon was the kind of man who arrived 5 minutes late and acted as if everyone else should be grateful he showed up at all. Today, he was sitting alone at a corner table 20 minutes early, staring at a glass of water he clearly had no intention of drinking. The moment he saw me walk through the door, he stood up so quickly he nearly knocked his chair over. I could see exhaustion all over his face, dark circles under his eyes, tension in his jaw. Shoulders pulled tight. He looked like a man who had spent the entire night trying to hold together a lie that was already falling apart. I sat down across from him without smiling. You wanted to talk. Devon nodded. Thank you for coming. You have 1 hour. He looked down for a moment before speaking. Things got out of hand Sunday night. That's one way to describe it. My mother shouldn't have said those things. And Jamal shouldn't have assumed he could move in. And his eyes lifted toward mine. And I shouldn't have handled it the way I did. Finally, a tiny piece of honesty. Unfortunately for him, it arrived about 3 years too late. The waiter appeared and took our orders. As soon as he left, Devon leaned forward. Look, I know you're upset. Upset? I repeated. Is that what you think this is? Then what is it? I laughed softly. That's the problem, Devon. You still don't understand. He rubbed his forehead. Help me understand. Okay. I folded my hands together. Let's start simple. Why did you agree with your mother? He immediately looked uncomfortable. I told you. I was trying to help Jamal. No, you were trying to impress your mother. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You don't understand what it's like growing up with her. Then explain it. Devon stared out the window for several seconds. Nothing was ever enough. There it was. The truth hiding underneath everything else. What do you mean? I asked. Jamal was always her favorite. His voice dropped lower. When we were kids, if Jamal got a B, Mom celebrated. If I got an A, she asked why it wasn't an A+. When Jamal quit jobs, she made excuses for him. When I made mistakes, she treated them like character flaws. I listened quietly. So, you spent your entire life trying to earn approval? He nodded. I guess. And you still are. The words hit harder than he expected. I watched it happen in real time. His expression shifted. His eyes lowered. His shoulders sank slightly. Because deep down, he knew I was right. You don't get it, he said quietly. I just wanted her to be proud of me. At the cost of your marriage? He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Our food arrived. Neither of us touched it. Do you know what the saddest part is? I asked. Devon looked up. What? You actually could have made her proud. What does that mean? You didn't need to pretend. He frowned. Pretend about what? I stared at him. Seriously? Zariah. Pretend to be the provider. Pretend to be wealthy. Pretend the house belonged to you. His face immediately hardened. Why are we talking about this? Because it's the entire reason we're here. Nobody needed to know where the money came from. I did. He looked away. My family would have treated me differently. Your family already treats you differently. He opened his mouth but stopped. Again, he knew I was right. Loretta didn't respect him. She controlled him. There was a difference. For years, Devon confused obedience with love because it was easier than admitting the truth. You know what really happened Sunday? I asked. What? Your mother finally believed her own fantasy. What fantasy? That you were the man paying for everything. He remained silent. And because she believed it, she assumed she could decide who lived in the house. She was wrong. Yes. I nodded. She was. For the first time, real fear appeared in his eyes. Not anxiety, not embarrassment. Fear. Zariah. What? What exactly are you planning? There it was. The question everyone eventually asked when they realized I wasn't reacting emotionally. They started wondering what I was doing strategically. Planning? I repeated. You called moving trucks. Yes. You ordered a full inventory review. My eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting. How did you know that? He froze. Wrong answer. Devon. What? How did you know that? He looked trapped. I just heard something. From who? Silence. I leaned back in my chair. You had somebody spying on me? No. Then explain. He couldn't. Because there was only one possible explanation. Somebody inside my company had spoken to him. That meant boundaries had already been crossed. I made a mental note to investigate later. Forget it, I said. We'll discuss that another time. Devon exhaled slowly, relieved. He shouldn't have been. Look, he said. Whatever happens next, can we please keep my family out of it? I nearly laughed. Your family started it. They're just emotional. No, they're entitled. There's a difference. Not when entitlement lasts 30 years. He rubbed his face again. I don't know how to fix this. You can't. The answer came so quickly he looked shocked. What? You can't fix it. Why not? Because this isn't about Sunday dinner anymore. His face went pale. Then what is it about? I held his gaze. Trust. The word sat between us. Heavy. Permanent. I trusted you. I continued. I trusted you when you asked me to hide my success from your family. I trusted you when you promised it was temporary. I trusted you every time you said things would get better. Devon's eyes lowered. And Sunday night showed me something. What? The truth. He swallowed hard. Which is, you were never protecting our marriage. His face tightened. That's not fair. You were protecting your image. He said nothing. Every lie was about making yourself look bigger. Silence. Every secret was about making yourself feel important. Silence. Every compromise came from me. Silence. By now, the food on the table was completely untouched. Neither of us cared. The conversation mattered more. Finally, Devon looked up. Do you still love me? It was such a simple question, such a human question. And for a second, I hated how difficult it was to answer. Because part of me still remembered the man I married, the man who made me laugh, the man who supported me during long nights at work, the man who once promised we'd build a life based on honesty. But that version of Devon felt very far away now, buried beneath insecurity, lies, and weakness. I don't know, I admitted. The answer devastated him more than anger ever could. His shoulders slumped. His eyes lost focus. For the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely heartbroken. I never wanted this. Neither did I. Then how did we get here? I thought about Loretta, Jamal, Kesha, the years of manipulation, the lies, the excuses, the compromises. Then I looked directly at him. One bad decision at a time. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Devon pushed his untouched plate away. What happens now? He asked quietly. I stood up and picked up my purse. Now? Yeah. Now you go home. And you? I go back to work. That's it? I nodded. For today. He looked confused. For today? I smiled faintly. Devon, the funny thing about consequences is that they don't always arrive immediately. He stared at me. What does that mean? I slipped my purse onto my shoulder. You'll find out soon enough. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant. Behind me, Devon remained frozen at the table, watching, waiting, wondering. What he didn't realize was that while he spent lunch trying to save a marriage, another conversation was already taking place across town. A conversation involving Loretta, Jamal, Kesha, and a real estate agent. And by the time I learned what they were planning, Sunday night's betrayal was going to look small compared to what came next. The conversation with Devon should have made me feel something. Anger, satisfaction, regret. Instead, as I drove back toward my office, I felt strangely calm. That calmness scared me more than rage ever could. Rage is temporary. Calm means the decision has already been made. The truth was, somewhere between Sunday dinner and that restaurant table, I had stopped thinking about how to save my marriage and started thinking about how to protect myself from it. By the time I returned to my office, Vanessa was already waiting. One look at my face, and she knew the meeting had not gone well. Let me guess, she said as I stepped inside. He apologized without taking responsibility. I laughed. That's disturbingly accurate. I've met men like that. Unfortunately, so have I. Vanessa handed me a folder. Speaking of people making terrible decisions, you might want to see this. I opened the folder and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Several printed photographs sat inside. The first showed Loretta standing outside the Baldwin Hills property. The second showed Jamal. The third showed Kesha. The fourth showed all three of them speaking with a woman holding a clipboard. A real estate agent. My eyes narrowed. When were these taken? This morning. How? Vanessa smiled slightly. Remember that private security company you hired after the break-in last year? I nodded. One of their field supervisors called. He thought the activity looked suspicious. I looked down at the photographs again. There was no misunderstanding here. They were conducting a property walkthrough. Interesting, I said quietly. Vanessa leaned forward. Want the really interesting part? Absolutely. She slid another page across the desk. The agent's name is Sandra Price. She specializes in luxury property sales. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. Then I started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. They are trying to sell the house. Vanessa nodded. Looks that way. A house they don't own. Correct. Without speaking to the owner. Also correct. I leaned back in my chair. That's actually impressive. Impressive? The level of confidence required to commit fraud this casually is remarkable. Vanessa laughed. Should we stop them? I considered the question carefully. Logic said yes. Common sense said yes. My legal team would definitely say yes. But another part of me was curious. Very curious. No, I said finally. Let them continue. Vanessa blinked. Seriously? Absolutely. Why? Because people reveal their true character when they think they've already won. She smiled immediately. Oh, this is going to be good. I think so. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Meetings, reports, phone calls, contracts. Normal business. But beneath every conversation, my mind kept returning to those photographs. Loretta had not learned anything from Sunday night. Neither had Jamal. Instead of asking questions, they had doubled down. Instead of becoming cautious, they had become more entitled. And entitlement has a predictable side effect. It makes people careless. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize. I answered. I was hoping to discuss a property opportunity with you. Interesting. Very interesting. Go ahead. I've recently been speaking with members of the Reynolds family regarding a luxury residence in Baldwin Hills. I kept my voice neutral. Have you? Yes. They informed me that ownership transition discussions are underway. Ownership transition. What a creative way to describe theft. I see. Sandra continued carefully. Normally I wouldn't contact someone in your position, but several details seemed unclear. Finally, someone intelligent. What details? I asked. The individuals I met appeared very eager to discuss listing the property. And none of them could provide ownership documentation. There it was. I closed my eyes briefly. Sandra was smarter than they realized. That must have been frustrating. A little concerning, actually. Why? Because people who legally own multi-million-dollar properties generally know where the paperwork is. I laughed. A genuine laugh this time. That's a fair observation. Sandra hesitated. May I ask you something directly? Of course. Do those individuals have any legal authority over that property? I looked out the office window at the Los Angeles skyline. Then I answered with complete honesty. No. Silence. None? Sandra asked. None whatsoever. Another silence. Then Sandra sighed. Well, that explains quite a lot. I'm sure it does. Would you like me to terminate all communication with them? I considered it for a moment. Then I smiled. Actually, no. No? Continue exactly as you have been. Sandra sounded surprised. You're serious? Very. May I ask why? Because I'm curious how far they're willing to take this. For a second, Sandra said nothing. Then she laughed softly. You know, Miss Washington, I think I'm going to enjoy working with you. The feeling is mutual. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This situation was escalating faster than I expected. Sunday night had started with a family power play. Less than 48 hours later, it was evolving into attempted real estate fraud. Somewhere, deep inside, I knew things were only getting started. My instincts had been warning me since dinner. Loretta wasn't acting alone. Jamal wasn't smart enough to organize something like this by himself. Somebody had convinced them they could actually take control of that property. Somebody had fed their delusions. And eventually, I would find out who. Around 6:30 that evening, I returned to the mansion. The moment I walked through the front door, I noticed something different. Excitement. The house felt energized, almost celebratory. Voices drifted from the living room. Laughter. Plans. Dreams. I followed the sound and found Loretta, Jamal, Kesha, and Devon sitting together. Papers covered the coffee table, property brochures, floor plans, market reports. My arrival immediately silenced the room. Evening, I said. Nobody answered. I looked down at the documents. Planning something? Jamal straightened immediately. Just discussing the future. Sounds exciting. Kesha smiled smugly. Very exciting. Devon looked uncomfortable. Loretta looked triumphant. The expression on her face reminded me of a gambler sitting on a winning hand. Unfortunately for her, she didn't realize she was playing with counterfeit cards. You know, Loretta said, folding her arms. I've been thinking. That's always dangerous. Her eyes narrowed. This family deserves stability. Agreed. Jamal deserves an opportunity. Maybe. And this property could change all our lives. I smiled politely. That's certainly one possibility. Jamal leaned forward. You're going to see things differently soon. I almost laughed. If only he knew. Because while they sat there imagining luxury sales, inheritance plans, and financial freedom, a completely different future was already approaching. The moving trucks were scheduled. The inventories were complete. The ownership records were secured. And somewhere out there, the consequences of their greed were quietly moving closer with every passing hour. They thought they were preparing for a victory. In reality, They were walking deeper into a trap they had built with their own hands. And the most dangerous part? They still believed I was the victim in this story. They had absolutely no idea I was the one holding all the cards. Wednesday morning arrived faster than anyone in that house expected. I woke up before dawn, dressed for work, and quietly walked downstairs with a cup of coffee in my hand. The mansion was silent, peaceful, almost innocent. If someone had walked through the front door at that moment, they would never have guessed that an entire family was about to experience the most expensive reality check of their lives. I sat alone at the kitchen island and checked my phone. 5:43 a. 17 minutes. That was all. 17 minutes until the first truck arrived. For a brief moment, I wondered whether Devon had finally told them the truth during the night. Then I remembered who Devon was. If honesty had been an option for him, none of this would be happening in the first place. At exactly 5:58, my phone vibrated. A text message appeared from Marcus. Crew is outside. Right on schedule. I smiled and stood up. 2 minutes later, the sound of heavy diesel engines rolled through the neighborhood. One truck, then another, then a third. Massive white moving trucks lined the curb in front of the mansion. The noise immediately triggered activity upstairs. A bedroom door opened, then another. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. Confused voices followed. By the time the front doorbell rang, I was already standing in the foyer waiting. I opened the door. Marcus stood there wearing a company polo shirt, holding a digital tablet. Behind him, 10 uniformed movers prepared equipment on the driveway. "Good morning, miss." Washington. "Good morning, Marcus. Ready to begin?" "Absolutely." He handed me the tablet. "Just need your authorization." I signed without hesitation. The moment my signature appeared on the screen, Marcus nodded toward his crew. "Let's move." Within seconds, professional movers began entering the house. Dollies, packing materials, inventory scanners, protective blankets. The operation moved with military precision. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to execute a contract. "What the hell is going on?" The voice exploded from the staircase. "Jamal." I turned. He stood halfway down the stairs wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, staring at the moving crew in complete disbelief. A second later, Kesha appeared behind him, then Loretta, then Devon. Nobody looked prepared for what they were seeing. "Morning," I said pleasantly. "Zariah, what is this?" Jamal demanded. Before I could answer, two movers walked past him carrying expensive artwork from the hallway. His mouth literally fell open. "Hey!" he shouted. "Put that back." The movers ignored him completely and continued toward the front door. Marcus stepped forward professionally. "Sir, please do not interfere with company personnel." "Company personnel?" Jamal barked. "This is my house." Marcus glanced at me. I smiled. He understood immediately. "Actually, sir, our documentation indicates otherwise." Jamal looked confused. Loretta rushed forward. "Stop everything right now." Marcus remained calm. "Ma'am, we have legal authorization to remove all inventoried assets belonging to our client." "Your client?" Loretta pointed directly at me. "Her?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's impossible." I took another sip of coffee. "Is it?" Kesha suddenly noticed two movers disconnecting the massive 75-inch television mounted in the family room. "They're taking the TV!" she screamed. "Of course they are," I replied. "It belongs to me." Her face turned red instantly. "You can't take everything." "Why not?" "Because." She stopped. Because she had no answer. Ownership is difficult to argue against when you don't actually own anything. More movers entered the living room. Sofas were wrapped. Tables were catalogued. Decorative pieces disappeared into protective containers. Every item was scanned and logged before leaving the house. The process was so organized it almost looked beautiful. Loretta stared in horror. "Devon," she snapped. "Tell them to stop." Every eye turned toward him. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He stood there trapped between reality and the fantasy he had spent years creating. "Mom," he began. "No," Loretta interrupted. "Fix this." Devon looked at me. "Zariah." "Yes? Maybe we should talk about this." We did talk. Not like this. Actually, exactly like this. Another mover carried out a designer coffee table worth nearly $8,000. Jamal looked like he was about to have a heart attack. This is insane. No, I corrected. What's insane is trying to move into somebody else's house before asking permission. His jaw tightened. Nobody said that. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Nobody spoke. Because everyone remembered Sunday dinner. Everyone remembered Kesha claiming the master bedroom. Everyone remembered Jamal planning his home office. Everyone remembered Loretta ordering me out. Suddenly, those conversations sounded much less impressive. An hour later, the mansion looked completely different. Entire sections of the house were empty. The living room resembled a showroom after liquidation. The dining room looked abandoned. Even the walls appeared larger without the artwork. Panic was spreading now. Real panic. Not anger, not arrogance. Panic. Because for the first time, they were starting to understand something important. The luxury lifestyle they loved so much wasn't attached to the house. It was attached to me. Every expensive object leaving through that front door was proof. Around 8 o'clock, another vehicle arrived. This one wasn't a moving truck, it was a police cruiser. The moment Loretta saw it, her face lit up. "Thank God," she said. "Finally." Officer Ramirez stepped out of the vehicle and approached the property. "Good morning." "Officer," Loretta said immediately. "This woman is stealing our belongings." Officer Ramirez looked at me, then at Marcus, then at the inventory paperwork, then back at Loretta. "Do you have proof of ownership?" he asked. "Proof?" she repeated. "This is our house. Do you have documentation?" Silence. He turned toward me. "Miss Washington?" I handed him a folder. Inside were ownership records, inventory reports, purchase receipts, insurance documentation, and authorization agreements. The officer spent several minutes reviewing everything. When he finished, his expression became very clear. "Everything appears to be in order." Loretta stared at him. "What? The property being removed belongs to Miss Washington." "No, it doesn't." Officer Ramirez calmly closed the folder. "According to these records, it does." Jamal stepped forward. "This is ridiculous." "Sir," the officer replied, "if you believe ownership records are inaccurate, you can pursue the matter through civil court." That answer hit them harder than a punch. Because even the police weren't on their side. Reality wasn't on their side. Facts weren't on their side. The only thing supporting their position was entitlement. And entitlement isn't legal documentation. By noon, nearly half the mansion had been emptied. Furniture, electronics, artwork, appliances, decor. Piece by piece, the illusion was disappearing. I stood near the front door watching the final truck of the first phase being loaded. Behind me, the family sat in stunned silence. Nobody celebrated anymore. Nobody talked about master bedrooms or future plans. Nobody acted victorious. They simply watched their dream leave the house one item at a time. And as I looked at the fear growing across their faces, I realized something. This wasn't even the punishment. This was just the introduction. Because the furniture was never the real lesson. The real lesson was coming next. And when the first official bill arrived, every single person in that house would finally understand exactly how expensive their greed had become. As I stood near the front door watching the final truck disappear around the corner, I could feel the atmosphere inside the mansion changing by the second. The confidence that had filled the house only days earlier was gone. The arrogance was gone. The celebrations were gone. What remained was uncertainty, and uncertainty is a dangerous thing when people have spent years believing they are entitled to something they never earned. Behind me, nobody spoke. Loretta sat motionless at the kitchen island, staring at the empty living room. Jamal kept pacing back and forth between the hallway and the family room, as if furniture might somehow reappear if he looked hard enough. Kesha sat on a folding chair, scrolling through her phone with increasing frustration. Devon looked like a man attending his own funeral. For the first time since Sunday dinner, nobody was talking about master bedrooms, home offices, or future plans. Reality had finally entered the conversation. Unfortunately for them, reality was just getting started. The following morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. The moment I stepped into the executive suite, Vanessa followed me carrying a large stack of folders. One glance at her expression told me she had news. "Please tell me somebody did something stupid," I said as I sat behind my desk. Vanessa smiled. "Would you settle for extremely stupid?" "Always." She placed a folder in front of me. Our property management division completed its occupancy review. I opened the folder and immediately saw what I had been expecting: detailed reports, legal assessments, occupancy records, compliance summaries. Every page confirmed the same simple fact. 4 adults were currently residing inside a luxury property owned entirely by Oasis Holdings. 4 adults who had absolutely no legal occupancy agreement. 4 adults who believed they had inherited a lifestyle when in reality they had inherited a problem. Beautiful, I said quietly. Vanessa laughed. That's a strange word for this situation. Not really. I enjoy organized consequences. She leaned against the desk. So what's next? I turned several pages until I reached the section I wanted. Then I pointed to a specific number. Vanessa immediately started laughing. Oh my God. Exactly. You're actually doing it? Absolutely. $15,000? That's below market value, believe it or not. Her laughter became louder. Nobody in that house can afford $15,000 a month. I know. Then why offer the lease? Because I'm being generous. That answer made her laugh even harder. The truth was simple. The property could easily command a much higher monthly rate. Comparable luxury homes in the area were already approaching that range. But this was never about maximizing profit. This was about forcing reality into a conversation that had been built entirely on fantasy. For years, Loretta believed Devon paid for everything. For years, Jamal believed successful people owed him opportunities. For years, Kesha believed manipulation was a substitute for responsibility. And for years, Devon allowed all of them to believe whatever made his life easier. Now every lie was coming due at the same time. Around noon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Sandra Price. I smiled before answering. Good afternoon, Sandra. Good afternoon, Miss Washington. I thought you should know something. Her tone immediately caught my attention. What happened? Your family had another meeting. I leaned back in my chair. That sounds entertaining. It was certainly ambitious. Tell me. Sandra hesitated for a second before speaking. Jamal asked how quickly a luxury property could be sold. I closed my eyes and laughed. You're kidding. I wish I were. Please continue. When I explained that ownership verification would be required before any transaction could proceed, he became very frustrated. I'm shocked. Then he asked if family members could sell a property on behalf of the owner without direct authorization. Even Vanessa started laughing from across the office. And what did you tell him? I asked. I told him that was generally referred to as fraud. That answer was worth at least $10,000 by itself. How did he respond? Sandra paused. Not well. I imagine not. Then Loretta attempted to explain that the house would eventually belong to the family anyway. There it was. The real issue. Not ownership. Not legality. Entitlement. They genuinely believed wanting something gave them a claim to it. They genuinely believed proximity to success was the same thing as creating success. Thank you for letting me know, I said. You're welcome. Honestly, I've worked in luxury real estate for 17 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Neither have I. After ending the call, I stared out the window overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The city stretched for miles beneath the afternoon sunlight. Thousands of people were working, building businesses, paying bills, solving problems, creating opportunities. Yet somehow the people inside that mansion believed they deserved the rewards without any of the effort. It reminded me of something my mother used to say when I was young. Some people spend their lives waiting for a miracle, while other people become the miracle. I chose the second option. They chose the first. Around 4 o'clock, another report arrived. This one came directly from property management. I reviewed it carefully before smiling. Vanessa. Yeah? Prepare the occupancy package. Her eyes widened. Already? It's time. You want it delivered today? I nodded. Personally. She grinned immediately. This is going to be fun. I think so too. Less than 2 hours later, I pulled into the driveway of the Baldwin Hills mansion. The moment I stepped out of the car, I noticed several things. First, the house looked dramatically different without all the luxury furnishings. Second, nobody looked happy. Third, there were now visible signs of tension everywhere. Through the front windows, I could see Jamal arguing with Kesha. Loretta sat at the dining table holding her head in her hands. Devon stood near the kitchen staring at nothing. The dream was already cracking. They just hadn't realized how much worse it was about to become. I walked through the front door carrying a large envelope. Every conversation stopped immediately. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Nobody smiled. Nobody welcomed me home. Nobody even pretended anymore. Good. Pretending had wasted enough of my time already. What's that? Jamal asked the moment he saw the envelope. I looked at him calmly. Your future. The room fell silent. The room fell silent. Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody challenged me. The confidence that had fueled them during Sunday dinner was long gone, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that every time I walked into a room lately, something expensive happened. Jamal folded his arms and tried to look unimpressed. What does that mean? He asked. I walked calmly to the dining table and placed the envelope in front of him. Open it. He didn't move immediately. For the first time since this entire situation began, Jamal looked uncertain. Eventually, he grabbed the envelope, tore it open, and removed the documents inside. The moment his eyes landed on the first page, I watched the color slowly leave his face. What is this? He asked. An occupancy agreement. Kesha leaned closer. Occupancy agreement? Yes. Loretta stood up and moved around the table. Devon remained where he was, already looking defeated. Deep down, I think he knew exactly what was coming. Jamal continued reading. Then he reached the payment section. Then he stopped breathing for a second. $15,000? The number seemed to echo through the room. Kesha immediately snatched the paperwork from his hands. Her eyes moved down the page, then widened even more. This has to be a joke. It isn't. Loretta grabbed the documents next. Monthly occupancy fee, she read aloud. Due on the first of each month. Her voice trembled slightly. This is rent. Correct. You're charging us rent to live here? No, I replied calmly. I'm offering you the opportunity to stay here legally. The distinction hit harder than they expected, because suddenly the situation was no longer emotional. It was contractual. Business. Reality. Things that couldn't be manipulated through guilt, family pressure, or church speeches. Loretta stared at the paperwork again. This house belongs to family. No, it should belong to family. That's different. Jamal threw the documents onto the table. Nobody can pay $15,000 a month. Then you have a decision to make. What decision? Move out. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush concrete. For years, every conversation in that house revolved around what other people should sacrifice, what other people should provide, what other people should tolerate. Suddenly, the conversation was about them, and they hated it. You're doing this on purpose, Kesha snapped. Of course I am. The honesty caught her off guard. At least you're admitting it. Why wouldn't I? I asked. You tried to take my house. We did not. Really? I looked directly at her. Who picked the master bedroom? Kesha immediately looked away. Who planned the nursery? Silence. Who wanted my furniture? More silence. Who asked when I could be out? Nobody answered. Because they couldn't. The facts were too recent, too obvious, too embarrassing. Devon finally spoke. Zariah. I looked at him. What? Can we talk privately? No. His shoulders dropped. Please. Everything happened publicly. We can discuss it publicly. He closed his eyes for a second, then sighed. Fine. For a moment, nobody spoke. The tension in the room continued building. Then Loretta suddenly slammed her hand against the table. This is revenge. No. Yes, it is. No, Loretta. Revenge would have been throwing you out the same way you tried to throw me out. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Nothing came out, because she knew I was right. I had every legal right to remove them immediately. Instead, I was giving them options. Options they didn't like, but options nonetheless. Jamal pushed his chair back. This whole thing is ridiculous. Why? Because families don't treat each other this way. I laughed. I genuinely laughed. Families? He frowned. What's funny? Sunday night. What about it? You weren't talking about family then. The room became quiet again. When your mother called me a guest, nobody mentioned family. When Kesha claimed my bedroom, nobody mentioned family. When Devon agreed to push me out, nobody mentioned family. Funny how family only matters when the bill arrives. That one landed hard. Very hard. Devon lowered his head. Loretta looked furious. Jamal looked trapped. Kesha looked scared. For the first time, I realized they were finally beginning to understand the size of the mistake they had made. The house wasn't their victory. It was their responsibility. A responsibility they couldn't afford. What happens if we don't sign? Jamal asked quietly. There it was. The question I had been waiting for. Then property management begins the standard process. Meaning? Formal notices. His face tightened. Then, additional notices. Then, legal action. Nobody spoke. Then, he asked again. Eventually eviction. Kesha sat down heavily. Loretta looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Devon stared at the floor. The fantasy was officially dead. There would be no inheritance, no luxury lifestyle, no free mansion, no magical transfer of wealth, just bills, contracts, deadlines, consequences, the things successful people deal with every single day. I don't understand, Loretta whispered. Understand what? How you could do this to us. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered Sunday dinner. I remembered being called a guest. I remembered Devon's silence. I remembered Kesha asking to keep my furniture, and the sympathy disappeared. That's the problem, I said quietly. You still think this is something I'm doing to you? Loretta looked confused. What? I'm not doing this to you. I pointed toward the paperwork spread across the table. You did this to yourselves. Nobody argued. Nobody could. Because every decision leading to this moment belonged to them. Every warning had been ignored. Every assumption had been embraced. Every act of greed had pushed them one step closer to this exact outcome. I picked up my purse and walked toward the front door. Behind me, nobody tried to stop me. Nobody demanded answers. Nobody made threats. The fight had left the room. All that remained was reality. As I reached the doorway, I paused and looked back one final time. 4 adults sat around a nearly empty dining room staring at paperwork they couldn't afford. A week earlier, they believed they were inheriting a luxury lifestyle. Now they were calculating survival. You have 72 hours, I said calmly. To do what? Jamal asked. I smiled slightly. Figure out how expensive entitlement really is. Then I walked out the door, leaving them alone with the first bill of many. What none of them realized was that the occupancy agreement wasn't the real disaster. It was only the beginning. Because while they were busy panicking over $15,000 a month, another problem was quietly forming behind the scenes. A problem connected to Devon. A problem connected to money. And a problem that would soon turn a family crisis into something much worse. The moment I drove away from the mansion, I knew the next 72 hours would determine everything. People reveal their true character when pressure arrives. Some become honest, some become responsible, some finally accept reality, and some become dangerous. Unfortunately, Devon had spent most of his life avoiding consequences, which meant I could no longer predict what he might do once desperation took over. The following morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it logically. Years of working in cybersecurity had trained me to trust patterns, and lately too many patterns were changing at once. Desperate people make reckless decisions. Reckless decisions leave traces, and traces eventually become evidence. Around 9:30, Vanessa knocked on my office door carrying a tablet. The expression on her face immediately caught my attention. Please tell me somebody didn't do something stupid again. Vanessa hesitated. Actually, that's exactly why I'm here. I leaned back in my chair. Who? Your husband. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened? Vanessa placed the tablet on my desk. Accounting flagged an irregular transaction this morning. I immediately focused on the screen. Several financial records appeared. Internal transfer requests, authorization logs, verification attempts. Most looked normal. One did not. What am I looking at? I asked. Vanessa pointed toward a specific transaction. Someone attempted to authorize a corporate payment using executive approval credentials. My eyes narrowed instantly. Executive credentials? Yes. Mine? Vanessa nodded. The room became very quiet. Was it successful? No. Relief flickered briefly through me, then disappeared. The attempt itself was the problem. How much? I asked. Vanessa swallowed. $250,000. I stared at her. Excuse me? $250,000. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I looked back at the screen. Every detail appeared exactly where it should. Timestamp, access point, authorization request, security response, rejection. Whoever attempted the transaction had failed, but they had still tried. Who had access? I asked quietly. Vanessa clicked another screen. That's where things get interesting. A location report appeared. My eyes immediately locked onto the address. Then my jaw tightened. The access attempt originated from Devon's bank branch. You've got to be kidding me. Vanessa slowly shook her head. I wish I was. I stood and walked toward the office window. Downtown Los Angeles stretched below me, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts were already racing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't somebody clicking the wrong button. This was intentional. Somebody had attempted to move $250,000. Somebody had used executive credentials they weren't authorized to access. Somebody had targeted my company. And every path pointed toward my husband. Does anyone else know? I asked. Not yet. Good. Vanessa looked surprised. Good? I want more information before we react. You think it was Devon? I looked out the window for several seconds. I think a desperate man just crossed a line. An hour later, I sat in a conference room with the head of corporate security, the chief financial officer, and two members of our compliance team. Every report told the same story. The authorization request had been submitted using stolen credential information. The user failed multi-factor verification. The transaction never completed. But the intent was obvious. Somebody wanted money. Fast. Could it have been an external attacker? The CFO asked. The security director shook his head. Unlikely. Why? Too specific. He tapped the report. Whoever attempted this knew exactly which account to target. I already knew what that meant. This wasn't a random cybercriminal. This was somebody close enough to understand my financial structure. Somebody who had heard conversations. Somebody who knew which accounts existed. Somebody connected to me personally. The meeting ended shortly after noon. As people left the room, Vanessa remained behind. What's the plan? She asked. I looked down at the reports. We wait. That's all? Not exactly. She folded her arms. Explain. If Devon did this, he's already panicking. Agreed. And panicked people make mistakes. Also agreed. So we let him keep talking. Vanessa smiled slowly. You think he'll expose himself? I think he'll expose everyone. My phone rang less than 30 minutes later. Devon. Right on schedule. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello. His voice sounded exhausted. More exhausted than usual. Can we meet? Why? Please. That's not an answer. Silence. Then a heavy sigh. I need help. There it was. The truth. Not love. Not reconciliation. Need. Help with what? I asked. Another pause followed. Money. Of course, everything suddenly made sense. The occupancy agreement, the panic, the bills, the pressure from Loretta and Jamal, the failed transaction. Every road led to the same destination. Money. How much? I asked. Can we talk in person? How much? His breathing became heavier. A lot. That's not a number. Finally, he answered. 200,000. I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised. Because the amount was almost identical to the failed transaction. That wasn't a coincidence. Not even close. What do you need $200,000 for? I asked. Silence. Then another sigh. It's complicated. No, Devon. It's expensive. He didn't respond. What happened? I asked. Jamal. One word. That was all it took. Jamal. Somehow I wasn't surprised. What about Jamal? He invested money. In what? A business opportunity. I almost laughed. Every family has one person who constantly discovers magical opportunities that somehow require somebody else's money. Jamal had been that person his entire life. How much? Everything. I sat back in my chair. There it was. The disaster. Everything. Yes. And now? Devon's voice cracked slightly. Now it's gone. I looked out the window again. Somewhere across the city, my husband was drowning in problems he helped create. Somewhere inside that nearly empty mansion, Loretta still believed circumstances were unfair. Somewhere, Jamal was probably searching for another shortcut. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, the consequences were finally catching up. "We need to talk," Devon said again. "You're right," I replied quietly. "We do." What he didn't know was that I already possessed information he hadn't revealed. The failed transaction, the stolen credentials, the attempted theft. And if my instincts were correct, the story he was preparing to tell me was only a small piece of a much larger disaster. Because desperate people rarely commit just one mistake, they usually commit several. And something told me the biggest mistake was still waiting to be discovered. After ending the call with Devon, I remained seated in my office for several minutes, staring at the city skyline while replaying every word he had just said. The most dangerous lies are not the ones people tell others. They're the ones people tell themselves. For years, Devon convinced himself that protecting his mother's opinion was more important than protecting his marriage. Jamal convinced himself that success was always one lucky opportunity away. Loretta convinced herself that entitlement was the same thing as family loyalty. And now all three of them were colliding with reality at the exact same time. The problem for them was simple. Reality always wins. Around 6 that evening, I arrived at the restaurant Devon had chosen. Unlike our previous lunch meeting, he already looked defeated before I even sat down. His suit jacket was wrinkled. His tie hung loose around his neck. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. The confident man who once enjoyed taking credit for my success was disappearing rapidly. In his place stood someone exhausted, frightened, and finally running out of excuses. I slid into the seat across from him. "You wanted to talk." Devon nodded. "Thank you for coming. Let's skip the formalities." He looked down at the table. "Fair enough." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Devon exhaled heavily and rubbed both hands across his face. "Everything is falling apart." I noticed. "I'm serious." "So am I." He stared at me for several seconds. "You don't seem surprised." "Should I be?" Most people would be. Most people weren't at Sunday dinner. That shut him up immediately. The waiter arrived, took drink orders, and left. The moment we were alone again, Devon leaned forward. "I need you to understand something." "Go ahead." "I never thought it would get this bad." "Neither did I." "That's not what I mean." "Then, explain." He swallowed hard. "I thought I could manage it." "Manage what?" "My family." I laughed softly. "How's that working out?" He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The answer was sitting right in front of him. 3 years of lies had created a disaster neither of us could ignore anymore. "Tell me about the money," I said. His eyes immediately shifted away. "What about it?" "The $200,000. Another pause. "Jamal invested it." "You already told me that." "Okay. Now tell me the part you're leaving out." His jaw tightened. "What makes you think I'm leaving something out?" I held his gaze. "Because you always do." That one hurt. I could see it in his face. "Good. Truth should hurt sometimes." Devon stared down at the table for several seconds before finally speaking. "The investment wasn't entirely Jamal's idea." "Whose idea was it?" Silence. Then a whisper. "Mine." There it was. The confession. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Jamal wasn't organized enough to create something this complicated by himself. Someone else had to be involved. Someone with access to money. Someone desperate to prove he could finally become successful without my help. Someone exactly like Devon. "How much did you put in?" I asked. 100,000. "Your money?" He hesitated. "Wrong answer." "Devon." His shoulders slumped. "Not all of it." "How much?" 30,000. I stared at him. "And the other 70? Silence. "Devon." He looked miserable. "Loans." There it was. Another piece of the puzzle. "Personal loans?" "Yes." "From where?" "Several places. Banks? Some? And the rest?" He didn't answer immediately. That worried me. "A lot." "The rest?" I repeated. His voice dropped. "Private lenders." I closed my eyes for a second. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. When financially irresponsible people start borrowing money from private lenders, things usually get ugly very quickly. "How much do you owe?" "I don't know exactly." "Try." "About 80,000. In addition to the loans?" He nodded. "And the investment is gone?" "Completely." I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, the panic made much more sense. The occupancy agreement wasn't the real crisis. The rent wasn't the real crisis. The real crisis was debt. Massive debt. Debt that was growing larger every day. Debt Devon had hidden from me while pretending everything was fine. What was the investment? I asked. He laughed bitterly. A technology startup. Please tell me you researched it. Silence. Devon. Not enough. Who introduced you? He looked embarrassed. Jamal. Of course. Of course it was Jamal. I could practically see how it happened. Jamal discovers a guaranteed opportunity. Jamal promises huge returns. Jamal convinces Devon this is finally their chance to prove themselves. Devon ignores every warning sign because he desperately wants validation. Money disappears. Reality arrives. Story over. When did this happen? I asked. 6 months ago. My eyes narrowed. 6 months? He nodded. You've been hiding this for 6 months? I thought I could fix it. By doing what? Making the money back. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was ridiculous. You lost $100,000 and your solution was to gamble harder? I wasn't gambling. You absolutely were. The waiter arrived with our drinks and immediately sensed the tension. He set everything down and left as quickly as possible. Smart man. You don't understand, Devon said. Then help me. I needed something that was mine. For the first time that evening, I said nothing. Devon looked down at his hands. Everything successful in our lives came from you. His voice sounded hollow. The house, the investments, the lifestyle, the security, all of it. And I hated it. There it was. The real truth. Not money, not business. Pride. Pride had always been the disease. The money was just a symptom. You hated being married to a successful woman. No. Then what? He looked up at me. I hated feeling unnecessary. The honesty surprised me. Maybe because it was the first truly honest thing he'd said in weeks. You were never unnecessary, I replied quietly. That's not how it felt. Because you measured your value incorrectly. He looked confused. What does that mean? You thought money created worth. Silence. It doesn't. More silence. Character does. That one landed. Hard. Because deep down, Devon knew exactly where his character had failed. Sunday dinner. The lies. The debts. The secrets. Every road led back to the same place. I screwed everything up, didn't I? He asked quietly. For a moment I considered lying. Then I decided he deserved the truth. Yes. He nodded slowly, almost like he expected the answer. Can it be fixed? I looked at him carefully. The exhausted face, the defeated posture, the fear he could no longer hide. Part of me remembered the man I once loved. The other part remembered the man who stood beside his mother while she tried to throw me out of my own house. I don't know, I answered honestly. Devon lowered his eyes again. We sat there in silence for several seconds. Then his phone suddenly rang. The moment he saw the caller ID, every trace of color vanished from his face. What? I asked. He didn't answer. Devon? Slowly, he turned the screen toward me. Unknown number. Then the phone rang again, and again, and again. 5 calls in less than 30 seconds. His hands started shaking. Who is that? I asked. Devon swallowed hard. One of the lenders. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Because the fear in his eyes wasn't normal debt fear. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't stress. It was something much worse. And as the phone continued vibrating across the table, I realized we had just crossed into entirely new territory. Whatever mess Devon and Jamal had created, it was far bigger than a failed investment, and the people demanding their money back were no longer willing to wait. As the phone continued vibrating across the table, neither of us moved. Devon stared at the screen like it was a loaded weapon. The caller hung up. 2 seconds later, the phone rang again. Then again. Then again. Whoever was on the other end clearly wasn't interested in voicemail. They wanted an answer. Immediately. I watched Devon's face carefully and realized something that made my stomach tighten. This wasn't the reaction of someone dealing with an overdue credit card bill or a frustrated bank manager. This was fear. Genuine fear. The kind of fear that settles deep in a person's chest when they know a situation has moved beyond their control. Answer it, I said quietly. Devon shook his head. I can't. Why not? Because I don't know what they're going to say. I think you do. The phone stopped ringing. For a moment, silence returned. Then a text message appeared. Devon looked down at the screen and immediately turned pale. What? I asked. He hesitated. Nothing. Devon. Another hesitation. Then he slowly pushed the phone across the table. I looked down. The message contained only 7 words. Call us back. No more extensions. My eyes narrowed. Extensions? Devon looked away. How much time have they already given you? He rubbed his forehead. 3 months. 3 months? Yes. And you've told nobody? He laughed bitterly. Who exactly was I supposed to tell? I stared at him. Your wife would have been a good start. The words landed hard. He didn't respond because he couldn't. Every disaster sitting in front of him was built on the same foundation. Pride. Pride convinced him to hide the truth. Pride convinced him to take loans he couldn't afford. Pride convinced him to chase success instead of building it, and now pride was sending collection notices to his phone. Tell me everything, I said. Devon sat silently for several seconds before finally speaking. After the investment collapsed, I thought I could recover the money. How? Another opportunity. I closed my eyes. Of course. There was always another opportunity. That's how people like Jamal operated. One bad decision inevitably led to another. How much did you lose the second time? Devon didn't answer immediately. Wrong answer. How much? I repeated. 40,000. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because the alternative was screaming. And after that? Another 20. And after that? He lowered his head. Another 15. I stared at him in disbelief. You kept going? I was trying to get back to even. There it was. The exact sentence that destroys gamblers, investors, addicts, and desperate people every single day. Just one more chance. Just one more deal. Just one more risk. The finish line is always one step away until everything collapses. So how bad is it? I asked. Devon took a deep breath. Including interest? Yes. About 280,000. For a moment, even I was speechless. Not because of the number itself. I've worked with larger numbers my entire career. What shocked me was how efficiently he had destroyed himself. Less than a year earlier, Devon's finances were stable. Not impressive, not extraordinary, but stable. Now he was drowning. Does your mother know? I asked. He almost laughed. No. Jamal? No. Kesha? No. So everyone in that house still thinks you're the successful provider? Yes. The irony was almost painful. The same lie that made him feel important was now trapping him. If he admitted the truth, his entire image collapsed. If he stayed silent, the debt continued growing. Either way, he lost. When were you planning to tell them? I asked. I wasn't. Honest answer. At least there was that. His phone rang again. Same number. This time, instead of ignoring it, he silenced the device completely. That won't make them disappear. I know. Then why do it? He looked exhausted. Because I wanted 5 minutes where my heart wasn't racing. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. Not the debt, not the lies, the exhaustion. Living inside a collapsing structure requires constant energy. Every day becomes an exercise in avoiding reality. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every decision becomes another attempt to delay the inevitable. Eventually, people break. I was starting to think Devon was reaching that point. There's something else, isn't there? I asked. His eyes immediately shifted. Confirmation. Devon. He remained silent. What else? It's complicated. Everything is complicated. Try anyway. He took a long breath. The lenders don't only want money. My stomach tightened. Meaning? Meaning they want collateral. That got my attention immediately. What collateral? Silence. Devon. He looked miserable. The house. For several seconds, I honestly thought I misheard him. Excuse me? They wanted security. You offered my house as collateral? Not officially. There is no unofficial version of that sentence. His face twisted with embarrassment. I told them I had access to significant real estate assets. I stared at him. You implied you owned the property. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Suddenly everything started connecting. The pressure, the panic, the obsession with maintaining the lie, the attempt to access company funds, the desperate need for money. None of this was about pride anymore. Pride started the problem. Survival was driving it now. Do they know the house isn't yours? I asked quietly. Devon shook his head. Not yet. A cold feeling settled in my chest, because I finally understood why he looked so terrified every time the phone rang. The debt wasn't the only issue. The lie itself had become dangerous. The moment those lenders discovered he never owned the mansion, every promise he made would collapse. And people who lose money rarely enjoy being lied to. You need a lawyer, I said. I know. You need to tell the truth. I know. You need to stop making this worse. He laughed bitterly. That would have been useful advice 6 months ago. For the first time that evening, I almost felt sorry for him again. Almost. Then I remembered Sunday dinner. I remembered him agreeing when Loretta called me a guest. I remembered him helping his family steal a life he never built. Sympathy faded quickly. Actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences arrive with paperwork. Sometimes they arrive with bills. And sometimes they arrive through repeated phone calls from people who want nearly $300,000 returned immediately. Devon's phone buzzed again. Another message. He looked down, then closed his eyes. What now? I asked. Slowly, he turned the screen toward me. This message was longer than the first. Much longer. And by the time I finished reading it, I realized the situation had become far more serious than either of us imagined. Because whoever sent that message knew exactly where Devon lived, and they were no longer asking politely. By the time I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the message on Devon's phone. It wasn't just the threat itself that bothered me. It was the certainty behind it. Whoever sent that message wasn't guessing. They knew where he lived. They knew how much he owed. They knew he was avoiding them. And worst of all, they believed he controlled assets that didn't belong to him. That combination had disaster written all over it. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath my penthouse building, I realized something important. For weeks, I had been treating this situation like a family problem, a marriage problem, a financial problem. It wasn't any of those things anymore. It had evolved into a liability problem, and liabilities have a way of spreading if you don't isolate them quickly. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. My first meeting wasn't with executives, investors, or clients. It was with our head of corporate security. By 7:30, I was sitting inside a secure conference room reviewing reports from the attempted transaction involving my company accounts. The more information I saw, the worse the situation became. Walk me through it again, I said. The security director nodded and pulled several files onto the screen. The unauthorized access attempt originated from a workstation associated with Devon's branch network. Not directly from his office? No. Could somebody else have used it? Possible. Likely? No. He zoomed in on the activity logs. Whoever initiated the request knew exactly which accounts to target. My jaw tightened. Meaning? Meaning this wasn't random. I already knew that. The question was how far Devon had gone. Had he simply tried to access information? Or had he actually attempted to move money? There was a difference. A very important difference. The director clicked another file. There's more. Of course there is. The credentials used weren't generated externally. I frowned. What does that mean? It means whoever attempted access possessed partial internal knowledge. The room suddenly felt much colder. Internal knowledge. That meant conversations, documents, observations. Somebody had collected information over time. Somebody had been paying attention. Somebody had been preparing. Can you prove it was Devon? I asked. Not yet. Can you rule him out? No. The answer hung in the air. Not yet. No. Somewhere between those two statements lived the truth. After the meeting ended, I returned to my office and closed the door. For several minutes, I sat alone thinking about everything that had happened over the past week. Sunday dinner, the attempted eviction, the moving trucks, the occupancy agreement, the debt, the threats, the failed transaction. Every problem seemed connected. Every road somehow led back to the same place. Desperation. Around 10 o'clock, Vanessa entered carrying another folder. Bad news? I asked immediately. Potentially. That's becoming a theme. She sat across from me. Property management called. What happened? Nobody signed the occupancy agreement. I laughed softly. I'm shocked. There's more. Of course there is. Vanessa opened the folder. Instead of signing, Jamal spent most of yesterday calling attorneys. That got my attention. Attorneys? Several. For what? Vanessa smiled slightly. Nobody seems entirely sure. That's reassuring. Apparently, he keeps changing the story. I rubbed my temples. Wonderful. One attorney thought it was a landlord dispute. Another thought it was an inheritance issue. A third believed it involved business ownership. Let me guess. He left out important details every time. Naturally. I leaned back in my chair. Jamal wasn't looking for legal advice. He was shopping for someone willing to tell him what he wanted to hear. People do that when reality becomes inconvenient. They keep searching until they find a version of the truth they can tolerate. The problem was that facts don't change just because you dislike her feet. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. Devon again. Lately, his calls had become so frequent that I could almost predict them. What now? I answered. His voice sounded exhausted, more exhausted than ever. Can we meet? We're developing a pattern. Please. Why? Silence. Then a long sigh. Because things got worse. I closed my eyes. How? I don't want to discuss it over the phone. That's usually a bad sign. You're not wrong. We agreed to meet later that afternoon. By the time I arrived at the restaurant, Devon was already waiting. One glance told me something had changed. He looked terrified. Not stressed, not worried. Terrified. The difference matters. Stress comes from pressure. Terror comes from consequences. I sat down slowly. What happened? Devon immediately pushed a folder across the table. Read it. I opened the folder. The first page contained financial statements. The second contained debt summaries. The third contained payment schedules. By the fourth page, I understood why he looked so frightened. This can't be right. It is. I looked up. $340,000? Devon nodded, including penalties. For several seconds, I honestly didn't know what to say. The number had grown again. Not because he borrowed more money, because interest, penalties, fees, and late charges were multiplying faster than he could keep up. The situation was spiraling. Fast. How did it get this bad? I asked quietly. Devon stared at the table. I stopped making payments. When? 2 months ago. Why? He laughed bitterly. Because I ran out of money. Fair answer. Terrible situation. And now? Now they want everything. I continued reading. Then another detail caught my eye. What's this? Devon's expression immediately changed. Nothing. Wrong answer. Devon. He looked trapped. It's not important. Then why is it highlighted? Silence. I tapped the page. What is it? He swallowed hard. A personal guarantee. My stomach tightened. For what? The investment. Suddenly everything clicked into place. Every single piece. The loans, the pressure, the threats, the panic. The lenders weren't just pursuing debt. They were enforcing a guarantee. Devon hadn't merely borrowed money. He had promised repayment personally, meaning if the investment failed, he became the target. Completely, legally, directly. Tell me you didn't sign this without reading it. His silence answered the question. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because the alternative was unbelievable. You signed a personal guarantee for hundreds of thousands of dollars? Jamal said it was standard. Jamal says a lot of things. Devon looked away. I know. For the first time, genuine regret appeared in his eyes. Not regret about getting caught. Regret about the decisions themselves. Unfortunately, regret is rarely useful after the paperwork is signed. I continued reading. Then I noticed something else. A date. A signature. A witness line. And suddenly another thought entered my mind. One that made everything even worse. Devon. What? Who witnessed this? His face went completely blank. What? The witness signature. I pointed directly at the document. Who signed it? He looked down, then immediately looked away. That reaction told me everything before he even answered. Devon. Silence. Who signed it? Finally, he whispered the answer. Jamal. I stared at him. Because in that moment, I realized this was never just a financial disaster. It was a family conspiracy built on greed, insecurity, and delusion. And if Jamal had been involved from the beginning, then the truth hiding underneath everything might be even worse than I imagined. The problem was no longer whether the investment failed. The problem was discovering how many lies had been told before it failed. And something told me we were about to find out. The drive back from the restaurant felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, not because of distance, because every new piece of information made the situation darker. Up until now, I had been dealing with arrogance, greed, and entitlement. Those things were ugly, but they were predictable. What worried me now was something else entirely. Intent. The moment Devon admitted that Jamal had witnessed the guarantee agreement, everything changed. Witnessing a document isn't a passive act. It means involvement. It means awareness. It means participation. And if Jamal had been involved from the beginning, then the story I had been hearing for weeks was incomplete, very incomplete. By the time I reached my office, I already knew what I needed to do. I called Vanessa. Conference room. 10 minutes. She arrived carrying her tablet and immediately noticed my expression. That bad? Potentially worse. Wonderful. I was hoping for a relaxing afternoon. I slid the loan documents across the table. Vanessa spent several minutes reading every page. The deeper she got, the more concerned she became. This isn't good. I know. Actually, no. This is significantly worse than not good. She pointed at the witness section. You believe Jamal knew exactly what was happening? I do. Then why would he let Devon sign this? I laughed softly. Because Jamal has spent his entire life treating other people's money like a solution. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. You think he knew the investment was risky? I think he didn't care. The room fell silent. Unfortunately, both explanations were equally believable. Around 4 o'clock, another report arrived from corporate security. This one immediately caught my attention. What is it? Vanessa asked. I looked at the file for several seconds before answering. Something I've been expecting, which means. I turned the screen toward her. Another access attempt. Her eyes widened. You're kidding. No. This time the attempted access wasn't directed at financial accounts. It targeted internal asset records, property ownership files, corporate registration documents, the exact information somebody would need if they were trying to prove control over the Baldwin Hills mansion. That's not a coincidence, Vanessa said immediately. No. Same source? Similar. She stared at the report. You think it's Devon again? I considered the question carefully. Not necessarily. Then who? Maybe someone using information Devon provided. The possibility hung heavily in the room, because if that was true, then the situation was expanding beyond one desperate husband. It meant multiple people were actively searching for ways to gain leverage. Multiple people were looking for exits. Multiple people were panicking. And panic creates mistakes. What do we do? Vanessa asked. I smiled slightly. Nothing. Nothing? Not yet. Why? Because people who think they're getting away with something usually keep going. Her expression shifted immediately. You want them to expose themselves. Exactly. Around 6 that evening, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Devon. It was Sandra Price. Good evening, Miss Washington. Sandra, I have another update. Please tell me it involves bad decisions. She laughed. Several. I leaned back in my chair. Go ahead. Jamal contacted me again. That alone wasn't surprising. And? He wanted to discuss market value of a house he doesn't own. Correct. I couldn't help laughing. What did he say? Sandra opened her notes. He asked how quickly a luxury property could be liquidated if a family needed immediate cash. Immediate cash. There it was. The debt was spreading. Did he mention why? I asked. Not directly. But he seemed desperate. That word caught my attention. Desperate people are dangerous because they stop thinking long term. They start chasing survival. And survival often destroys judgment. Anything else? I asked. Sandra hesitated. Actually, yes. What? At one point, he implied that legal ownership issues could be resolved after a sale. The room went completely quiet. Even Vanessa stopped moving. He said that? Almost word for word. I closed my eyes briefly. That wasn't arrogance anymore. That was stupidity mixed with panic. A very dangerous combination. Thank you for calling, I said. Of course. After the call ended, Vanessa stared at me. He actually believes he can sell the house. Apparently. That's insane. Yes. What happens if he keeps going? I looked out the window toward the city skyline. Eventually, he commits a crime. Neither of us spoke after that, because the answer was obvious. The line between fantasy and fraud was becoming thinner every day, and Jamal seemed determined to cross it. The following morning, everything accelerated. At approximately 9:13 a.m., my phone lit up with an incoming call from Devon. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. He wasn't speaking. He was breathing, hard, fast, panicked. "Devon?" I asked. No response. "Devon." Finally, his voice emerged. "It's over." My stomach tightened immediately. "What's over?" "Everything. Talk to me." I heard movement in the background, raised voices, a door slamming, then another voice shouting, "Jamal, what's happening?" I demanded. Devon finally answered. "They found out." The words hit me instantly. "Who found out?" Silence. Then one sentence changed everything. "The lenders know the house isn't ours." For several seconds, neither of us spoke, because I already knew what that meant. The one lie holding the entire structure together had finally collapsed. The mansion wasn't collateral. The mansion wasn't family property. The mansion wasn't Devon's asset. And now the people expecting repayment understood that. "How did they find out?" I asked quietly. Devon laughed once. A broken, defeated sound. "Because somebody checked." Of course they did. Serious people always verify information eventually. The only question was how they would react. "Where are you?" I asked. "At the house." And another silence. Then I heard something crash in the background. Not a small sound. Something heavy. Something violent. Devon's breathing became faster. "They're coming." A cold feeling settled in my chest. "Who?" His answer came almost as a whisper. "Everyone." And in that moment, I realized the consequences we'd been watching from a distance were no longer approaching. They had arrived. The consequences we had been watching from a distance were no longer approaching. They had arrived. The moment Devon whispered, "They're coming," I knew the situation had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. For weeks, maybe even months, everyone involved had been living inside a fantasy. A fantasy where bad decisions could somehow be corrected with bigger risks. A fantasy where lies could survive forever. A fantasy where money problems disappeared if you ignored them long enough. Now reality was standing at the front door demanding payment. "Who is there?" I asked. Devon looked toward the front window before answering. "3 vehicles." My stomach tightened. "Police?" "No." "Lawyers?" "No." His voice dropped lower. "The lenders." For a second, I closed my eyes. This was exactly what I had feared. Not because I thought they would break the law. Because desperation creates unpredictable situations. People who lose hundreds of thousands of dollars rarely arrive in good moods. "What are they doing?" I asked. "Waiting." "For what?" Devon laughed bitterly. "For somebody to tell them where their money is." Behind him, I could hear shouting. Jamal was yelling. Loretta was crying. Kesha sounded panicked. The dream team was finally experiencing something unfamiliar. Accountability. "Listen carefully," I said. "Do not argue with anyone." "Okay." "Do not threaten anyone." "Okay." "Do not sign anything." "Okay." Then I asked the question that mattered. "Oh, where is Jamal?" Silence. "Devon?" "He's gone." My eyes narrowed immediately. "Gone?" "He left 20 minutes ago." Of course he did. The architect of the disaster had vanished the moment the bill came due. That was probably the most predictable thing he had done all year. Did he say where he was going? No. Did he answer his phone? No. I nodded slowly. Jamal was running. Maybe not forever. Maybe not successfully. But he was definitely running. And the fact that he disappeared before the lenders arrived told me something important. He knew more than everyone else. Much more. "Stay where you are," I told Devon. "I'm coming over." 40 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway of the Baldwin Hills property. The scene looked exactly as chaotic as I expected. 3 black SUVs sat parked along the curb. Several men stood outside talking quietly. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was making threats. Somehow that was worse. Calm people are often more dangerous than angry people because calm people still have a plan. The moment I stepped out of my car, one of the men approached me. He looked to be in his 50s. Expensive suit, expensive watch, professional posture, not a thug, not a criminal, a businessman, which meant the situation was probably even more serious than Devon realized. Miss Washington? He asked. Yes. He extended his hand. Richard Lawson. I shook it. Can I help you? His expression remained polite. Actually, I believe we may be helping each other. Interesting. Very interesting. Go on. We've recently discovered certain misrepresentations involving a real estate asset connected to individuals residing in this property. Corporate language. Professional language. The language people use when they're trying not to say fraud in public. I see. Our understanding is that you are the legal owner. Correct. He nodded. Then unfortunately, it appears we have been given inaccurate information by several parties. Several parties. Not one. Several. That confirmed my suspicion immediately. Devon wasn't the only person involved. How much were you told? I asked. Richard smiled without humor. Enough. Translation: a lot. And now? Now we're determining who is responsible. Fair answer. Dangerous answer. Inside the house, I found Devon sitting at the dining table. He looked terrible. Loretta looked worse. The confident woman who threw macaroni into a sink and ordered me out of my own home seemed to have aged 10 years in a week. The transformation was remarkable. Where's Kesha? I asked. Upstairs. And Jamal? Devon laughed bitterly. Still missing. Loretta suddenly slammed her hand on the table. This is all his fault. Nobody answered, because nobody could honestly disagree. He lied to us, she continued. He said everything was under control. Again, nobody argued. He said the investment was safe. More silence. He said the money was guaranteed. Silence. Then finally Devon spoke. Mom? What? I think we're past blaming people. Those words surprised me. Not because they were profound, because they were mature. Maybe for the first time in his life, Devon was beginning to understand something important. Blame doesn't solve consequences. Responsibility does. Unfortunately, responsibility had arrived very late. My phone vibrated. Vanessa. I answered immediately. What happened? We found him. Every muscle in my body tightened. Where? Jamal. I figured. He's at a hotel near Lax. I wasn't surprised. Cowards rarely run far. They just run temporarily. Anything else? Vanessa hesitated. Actually, yes. What? You need to hear this. I could tell from her tone that whatever came next was important. Very important. Go ahead. The investment never existed. The room around me seemed to stop moving. What? We verified everything. Explain. Vanessa took a deep breath. There was no startup. For several seconds, I honestly thought I misunderstood her. No startup? None. No company? No. No investment? No. Her next sentence changed everything. The money was gone before it was ever invested. I slowly lowered myself into a chair, because suddenly the entire story looked different. The debt, the lies, the panic, the missing money, the disappearing brother. None of it pointed toward a failed business opportunity anymore. It pointed somewhere else, somewhere much darker. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized we weren't dealing with a bad investment. We were dealing with theft. We weren't dealing with a bad investment. We were dealing with theft. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Around me, the noise inside the dining room faded into the background as my mind replayed everything I had learned over the past few days. The startup, the debt, the guarantees, the lenders, the missing money, the disappearing brother. Suddenly, every piece fit together in a completely different way. This was never a story about a failed business opportunity. A failed investment implies risk. Risk implies uncertainty. But if the company never existed, there was no risk. There was only a lie. Are you still there? Vanessa asked through the phone. Yes. We've confirmed it 3 times. Walk me through everything. I stood and walked toward the kitchen while listening carefully. Vanessa began explaining the results of the investigation. After receiving the company name from documents found in Devon's files, our legal department conducted a full verification. No corporate registration, no active licenses, no tax records, no operational history, no employees, no investors, nothing. The company was a ghost. A website had existed for several months. Promotional materials existed. Social media pages existed. But the actual business itself did not. Someone created a sophisticated illusion and used it to collect money, then disappeared. How much? I asked quietly. Based on current records? Yes. Over $2 million. I stopped walking.
What?
Multiple victims. Suddenly, this was much larger than our family, much larger than Jamal, much larger than Devon. Who ran it? I asked. Vanessa hesitated. That's the problem. What? We don't know yet. The answer should have frustrated me. Instead, it worried me. Because if investigators still couldn't identify the person responsible, then whoever organized this operation was smarter than I initially assumed. What about Jamal? I asked. That's where things become interesting. Go on. We found communications. My stomach tightened immediately. Between who? Jamal and someone using the alias Victor Stone. Alias? Almost certainly. I leaned against the counter and listened carefully. According to the messages, Victor had convinced Jamal he could make millions through an exclusive technology opportunity. Early investors supposedly received guaranteed returns. Luxury presentations were held. Contracts were distributed. Testimonials appeared online. Every detail was designed to create credibility. And apparently it worked. Not only did Jamal invest, he recruited others, including Devon. Unbelievable, I whispered. Actually, it gets worse. Of course it did. It always did. How? Jamal earned commissions. The words hit like a punch. Commissions? For every investor he recruited. I closed my eyes. There it was. The final piece. Jamal wasn't just a victim. He was part of the machine. Maybe not the mastermind. Maybe not the architect. But definitely involved. How much? I asked. Approximately $90,000. I laughed once. A cold, humorless sound. $90,000. While everyone else lost money, Jamal got paid. Suddenly his enthusiasm made perfect sense. Suddenly his confidence made perfect sense. Suddenly his refusal to question anything made perfect sense. The man wasn't chasing opportunity. He was selling it. Can you prove it? I asked. Yes. Completely? Bank records, messages, transfer confirmations. We have all of it. For several seconds, I stared out the kitchen window. Somewhere inside the house, Loretta was still blaming circumstances. Somewhere upstairs, Kesha was probably trying to calculate how quickly her future had collapsed. And somewhere near the airport, Jamal was hiding in a hotel room while the truth closed in around him. Send me everything, I said. Already on its way. When the call ended, I turned around and found Devon staring at me. His face immediately told me he had heard enough to understand what was happening. What did she find? He asked. I considered lying, then decided against it. The company wasn't real. Devon's expression froze. What? There was never a startup. No. There was never an investment. No. There was never a business opportunity. No. Every answer seemed to drain more life from him. Then where did the money go? For a moment I didn't answer. Then I told him the truth. Somebody took it. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Devon sat back slowly. His eyes lost focus. His breathing became shallow. I watched the realization spread across his face. Every sacrifice, every loan, every lie, every risk, every debt, all of it for nothing. Not because the business failed, because there was never a business. No, he whispered. I'm sorry. No. His voice grew louder. No. Loretta looked up immediately. What's wrong? Devon didn't answer. Devon? Still nothing. Devon. Finally, he looked at his mother. The expression on his face was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Not fear, not anger, devastation, pure devastation. There was never a company. The room went silent, completely silent. Even the clock seemed louder. What are you talking about? Loretta asked. Devon swallowed hard. The investment. What about it? His voice cracked. It wasn't real. Loretta frowned. I don't understand. There was no startup. The confusion slowly disappeared from her face. In its place came horror. Because for the first time, she understood exactly what that meant. Every dollar was gone. Every promise was fake. Every sacrifice was worthless, and every debt remained. The truth landed on her like a collapsing building. Then suddenly she looked toward the front door, toward the driveway, toward the lenders waiting outside. And for the first time since I met her, Loretta Reynolds looked genuinely terrified. For the first time since I met her, Loretta Reynolds looked genuinely terrified. The woman who had spent years acting like consequences only happened to other people suddenly found herself staring directly at one. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The silence inside the dining room felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Then Loretta slowly sat down in her chair as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "No," she whispered. "There has to be some mistake." Devon stared at the table. "There isn't. Maybe they're looking at the wrong company." "They're not. Maybe the records are incomplete." "They're not." Every answer pushed her deeper into reality. Jamal had spent months selling a dream. Now that dream was collapsing one fact at a time. "Where is he?" Loretta suddenly asked. Nobody answered. "Where is my son?" Her voice became louder. "Where is Jamal?" Devon laughed bitterly. "Running." The word landed like a hammer, because everyone in the room knew it was true. Jamal wasn't hiding because he was confused. He wasn't missing because he needed time to think. He was gone because he already knew what was coming. My phone vibrated. A new message from Vanessa. I opened the attachment and immediately saw exactly what I needed. Bank records, transfer histories, commission payments, dozens of pages. Every document connected another piece of the puzzle. Every page pushed Jamal closer to exposure. I spent several minutes reviewing everything while the others watched nervously. Finally, I looked up. "How much?" Devon asked quietly. "How much what? How much did Jamal make?" Nobody moved, nobody breathed. $90,000. The reaction was immediate. Loretta's eyes widened. Kesha looked stunned. Devon simply stared at me. "What?" he whispered. "He earned commissions." "No." "Yes." "No. Bank records say otherwise." I handed him the documents. His hands shook as he turned the pages. Then his face changed. Then changed again. By the time he reached the final page, every trace of hope was gone. "He knew," Devon whispered. "Yes, he knew." "Yes, the entire time." I nodded. The truth settled over the room like smoke. Jamal hadn't simply believed a lie. He had helped spread it. Every family dinner, every conversation, every sales pitch, every promise. He wasn't recruiting investors because he believed in the company. He was recruiting investors because he was being paid. "He used me," Devon said quietly. Nobody argued, because nobody could. The evidence was overwhelming. He used all of us. That statement was less accurate. Jamal used everyone. But some people had chosen to ignore the warning signs. Some people had chosen greed over caution. Some people had chosen fantasy over facts. The responsibility wasn't equal, but it existed. "I trusted him," Devon said. "You wanted to trust him," I replied. He looked up. "What's the difference? Trust is earned." "You gave it away." That answer hurt. Good. Sometimes pain is educational. Suddenly another voice interrupted. "Kesha." "Wait." Everyone looked at her. "What?" Loretta asked. Kesha's face had gone pale. "If Jamal knew." She stopped. "What?" Devon asked. "Then why did he keep telling us to move into the house?" The question hung in the air. Then everybody understood at the same time. Because the answer was obvious. Jamal never planned to stay. The mansion was never his future. It was his backup plan, his emergency exit, his illusion of security while everything else collapsed. The realization hit Loretta especially hard. "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't do that." Nobody answered. "He wouldn't." Silence. "He wouldn't use his own family." This time Devon laughed. Not happily, not bitterly, just sadly. "Mom." She looked at him. "What?" He already did. The truth finally broke her. For years Loretta had defended Jamal no matter what happened. Every mistake, every excuse, every failure. She always found someone else to blame. But there comes a point where even the most determined denial runs out of places to hide. This was that point. Tears formed in her eyes. "I was trying to help him." "I know," Devon said. "I was trying to protect him. I know. He's my son. Devon nodded slowly, and that's exactly why he knew you'd believe him. Nobody spoke after that, because there wasn't anything left to say. The family dynamic that had existed for decades was collapsing in real time, not because of me, not because of the lenders, not because of the money, because the truth finally arrived. And truth has a way of exposing relationships that were never built on honesty to begin with. Another call came in. This time it was Vanessa again. I answered immediately. What happened? Her voice sounded excited. We found Victor Stone. Every head in the room turned toward me. Who is he? I asked. Not who. What? Victor Stone doesn't exist. I almost smiled. Alias. Multiple aliases. Can you identify the real person? A brief pause followed. Then Vanessa delivered the sentence that changed everything. Yes. I stood up slowly. Who? The answer arrived one word at a time. Jamal's business partner. The room exploded. What? Devon shouted. Loretta nearly dropped her glass. Kesha looked like she had seen a ghost. I remained perfectly still, because suddenly everything made sense. The commissions, the recruitment, the confidence, the disappearing act, the fake company, the missing money. Jamal wasn't just involved. He was connected directly to the people running the fraud. Whether he was a willing participant or a useful idiot no longer mattered. The damage was done. Can you prove it? I asked. Yes. Completely? Bank records, messages, meeting logs, travel records. We have enough to hand everything to investigators. I slowly ended the call. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Heavier. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to think. Finally, Devon broke the silence. What happens now? I looked around the room, the nearly empty mansion, the broken family, the frightened faces, the mountain of consequences waiting outside. Then I answered honestly. Now the truth catches up to everyone. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, nobody argued with me. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, nobody argued with me. The truth had finally stripped away every excuse, every illusion, and every comforting lie they had spent years hiding behind. The silence inside the mansion felt different now. Not tense, not angry. Empty. The kind of emptiness that appears when people realize the story they believed about themselves was never real. I looked around the room one final time. Loretta sat motionless at the dining table, staring at nothing. Devon looked exhausted beyond words. Kesha seemed completely defeated. The mansion itself felt hollow, almost symbolic. Just days earlier, everyone had fought over who would control this house. Now nobody seemed interested in it anymore. Funny how quickly a dream loses its appeal once responsibility arrives. Over the next several weeks, everything unraveled exactly the way reality said it would. Investigators became involved. Financial records were reviewed. Interviews were conducted. Bank accounts were examined. The deeper authorities looked, the more information surfaced. Jamal had not created the fraud operation, but he had knowingly participated in recruiting investors. He accepted referral payments. He repeated claims he never verified. He encouraged people to invest money he knew they could not afford to lose. Whether he considered himself a victim or not no longer mattered. Actions have consequences regardless of how people describe them afterward. The lenders eventually shifted their attention toward recovering losses through legal channels rather than intimidation. Once attorneys became involved, the situation changed dramatically. Documents replaced threats. Court filings replaced phone calls. Contracts replaced rumors. For the first time, facts began speaking louder than emotions. Devon cooperated fully. It wasn't courage that motivated him at first. It was exhaustion. Maintaining lies requires energy. Telling the truth requires none. After years of pretending, he simply had nothing left. During one of our final conversations before the legal proceedings moved forward, he sat across from me in a quiet conference room and looked older than I had ever seen him. I keep thinking about that dinner, he said. Which part? I asked. He laughed sadly. All of it. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he looked directly at me. You know what the worst part is? What? Losing the house wasn't the worst part. I wasn't surprised. No? He shook his head. The worst part was realizing I threw away someone who was actually on my side. For several seconds, I simply looked at him. There was a time when hearing those words would have meant everything to me. That time had passed. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted revenge, because some damage changes the shape of a relationship permanently. You can forgive someone and still recognize they no longer belong in your future. I did love you, I said quietly. Devon lowered his eyes. I know. But loving someone isn't enough if they keep choosing everyone except you. His shoulders dropped. I know. For the first time, I believed he actually did. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. There were no dramatic courtroom battles, no screaming matches, no last-minute attempts at reconciliation, just signatures, paperwork, closure. The marriage ended the same way it had truly died during Sunday dinner. Quietly. Definitively. As for Loretta, reality proved far more effective than any argument I could have made. The woman who once treated me like an outsider spent months confronting the consequences of her own choices. Her relationship with Jamal never fully recovered. Every conversation seemed haunted by the same question she could never stop asking herself. How many warning signs did I ignore because I wanted to believe what was comfortable? Eventually, she reached out to me. The message was simple. No excuses, no manipulation, no guilt, just an apology. A real one. Not because she wanted something, not because she needed help, because she finally understood. I accepted it. Forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. I forgave her for my own peace, not for her comfort. Kesha left shortly after everything collapsed. Once the money disappeared and the fantasy ended, so did her commitment to the future she imagined. I rarely thought about her after that. Some people enter your life to teach lessons. Nothing more. Jamal's story ended very differently. Legal consequences followed him for years. Investigations uncovered enough evidence to connect him directly to multiple fraudulent activities tied to the scheme. He spent a long time blaming everyone else. The economy, his business partner, the market, bad luck. Eventually, even he ran out of people to blame. The truth was painfully simple. He spent his entire life looking for shortcuts while other people were building roads. And shortcuts always seem faster until they collapse beneath your feet. As for the mansion, I sold it. Not because I needed the money. Not because the property had lost value. Because I no longer wanted to live inside a monument to everything that happened there. Every room carried memories. Every hallway reminded me of compromises I should never have made. Sometimes moving forward requires letting go of places that belong to older versions of yourself. The property sold for significantly more than I originally paid. The profit was substantial, but the money wasn't the victory. Freedom was. Several months later, I purchased a new home overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Smaller, simpler, peaceful. The kind of place where silence felt comforting instead of lonely. One evening, while sitting on the balcony watching the sun disappear beneath the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened. The attempted eviction, the lies, the greed, the debts, the betrayal, the investigations, the collapse. And surprisingly, I felt grateful. Not for the pain, not for the humiliation, not for the heartbreak. I was grateful for the clarity, because sometimes the worst experiences reveal the most important truths. I learned that generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. I learned that silence can be mistaken for weakness. I learned that people who benefit from your sacrifices are not always grateful for them. Most importantly, I learned that self-respect must always be protected, even when the people threatening it call themselves family. Looking back, Loretta thought she was throwing me out of a house. Jamal thought he was inheriting a fortune. Devon thought he was preserving his image. All three were wrong. What they were really doing was forcing me to stop shrinking myself for people who never deserved the space I gave them. In the end, I didn't lose a mansion. I didn't lose a marriage. I didn't lose a family. I lost illusions. And once those illusions disappeared, everything valuable remained. My integrity, my independence, my future. The funny thing about truth is that people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to avoid it, but eventually it arrives anyway. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but always eventually. And when it does, it asks only one question. Did you build your life on reality? Or on a story you hoped was true? I know my answer now. And for the first time in a very long time, I finally slept peacefully.